Did you know that the recently remastered Aether mod, a mod which has stood in history as one of the game's most influential, also happens to be a hotbed of controversy? The Aether mod, released all the way back in Christmas of 2011, has just received a massive rewrite, updating it into Minecraft's most current version. In this video, we'll look at the historical impact of the mod, the changes they've recently implemented into the new update, as well as the massive controversy surrounding the pack. First, an overview of the original Aether mod. The Aether mod launched their first release on December 25th, 2011, just over 2 years after Minecraft development started, and just barely 1 month after Minecraft's official release date. The mod was incredibly impactful to the community, and highly popular at the time. It was pretty much unmatched in terms of the content added, with an entire new dimension to explore, loads of new mobs to encounter, a handful of new ores to mine, dungeons to delve into, and bosses to battle. The overall gameplay design of the mod was highly polished, with well thought out progression. The new ores allowed you to make brand new tools and armors, but similar to Minecraft's ore progression, they were locked behind the previous tier of tool to mine them. The dungeons, similarly, came with a specific progression in mind, getting more difficult as you found later and later dungeons. However, likely due to the massive overall scope of the mod, updates to it were fairly few and far between, with many Minecraft versions being completely skipped and unable to be played with the Aether mod installed. This trend continued throughout most of the life of the mod, until Minecraft 1.12, which appeared to potentially be the final version of the Aether. But then, seemingly out of nowhere, a Minecraft marketplace version of the mod appeared, on sale for $10. Currently known as the Aether dimension, this map added floating islands, new mobs, dungeons, ores, and more, all similar, rather reminiscent of the Aether mod, while still being fairly unique. Little did anyone suspect this map would become the center of the massive controversy surrounding the Aether mod, as the community response to it was unhappy at best. But before we dive into the public reception behind the Aether marketplace map, we should first get a better understanding of what was actually in the Aether mod. The core of the mod's concept was the addition of a floating sky island dimension to explore. The player, after exploring the Nether to grab glowstone, could use it to construct a glowstone portal frame. When water is placed in this frame, it would ignite, turning into a blue portal. And whereas the Nether portal takes you down to the Nether, this Aether portal would take you up to the Aether. Up in the Aether, you would find everything is new. Green grass was replaced with grasses of much more unique colors, generally either a bluish color, a bright yellow, or various other blue-greens. In general, this dimension ended up being highly colorful, due to the unique color design the mod makers employed. Much like how the blocks here are familiar, but still different from the overworld, the mobs here are also somewhat reminiscent of various overworld creatures found in vanilla Minecraft. For example, you can encounter swine with wings, when pigs fly indeed, or sheep that can launch themselves into the sky, or air whales that are basically, well, actually, they're not anything like vanilla mobs. Then there are the moa. These iconic large birds come in various colors and patterns and can be tamed by stealing and hatching an egg of one, then raising it as your own. Tamed moa can be saddled and ridden, allowing you to fly through the skies. Once the player had their hands on one of these, it made finding and conquering the rare dungeons far easier of a task to accomplish. Speaking of the dungeons, there were 3 that could be found in the worlds: bronze dungeons, silver dungeons, and the elusive gold dungeons. Each dungeon structure was uniquely generated, with puzzles to solve, minions to battle, and a boss at the end to defeat. And upon defeating that boss, you are rewarded with a treasure chest containing loot based on the difficulty of that dungeon. Interestingly enough, the Aether had some development versions made before the end dimension was originally added to Minecraft. In fact, before the end was added, then developer Notch had been working on his own Sky Island world generation type, which was possibly inspired by the Aether mod. However, while this Sky Island generation did stay in the game as sort of an Easter egg, it does seem to have been at least somewhat implemented as well. The End Island world generation is rather similar to how Sky Islands generate, likely having been code that started as Sky Islands and then morphed into End Islands. While a bit of a stretch, it is possible to make the argument that the Aether mod indirectly inspired the End dimension. So now that we have a pretty solid understanding of what the Aether mod is, let's move on to the Aether marketplace map to see what similarities and differences differences exist between the two. In terms of the actual substance of this marketplace project, there seems to be a mixed bag between things directly borrowed from the original Aether, as well as with a lot of concepts that range from either tipping their hat to the Aether mod to those that are completely, entirely original. This may not have caused any controversy at all, if not for the fact that the creators of this marketplace map had absolutely nothing to do with the original development team of the Aether mod. Because of this, some in the community felt that they were stealing from the free Aether mod to make a paid map. The original mod makers even weighed in at one point to express their disapproval of the map, stating that they weren't asked permission before it was made, insinuating that it was stolen. But we should probably understand what's in this map to be able to form our own conclusion on that. So what exactly is in this Aether map? Well, according to the map's description on the marketplace, it adds an Aether dimension, 5 floating biomes with sub-biomes, 42 fully custom mobs, 4 bosses, and 186 new blocks. The map also features a handful of new ores, loads of new items and tools, and numerous large structures to find and explore. So clearly the map adds plenty of new content to the game, but how much of it is original versus lifted from the Aether mod? Well, in terms of unique content, there is a plethora of features to discuss. Found across the world are unique custom villages with various houses, pathways, and of course, villagers. These villagers come in multiple variants and can be traded with to get items. There are also pirates found on ships across the world, often with lots of loot nearby. Looking back, the Aether mod has nothing similar to this, with the closest thing being the dwelling buildings that rarely generate in the world. However, these don't have any inhabitants and aren't particularly similar. Going back to the Aether marketplace map, it has loads of custom mobs, most sharing minimal to no similarities to any Aether mod mobs. The Aether map even has a rideable dragon mount that, while is similar to the Aether Moa, is definitely unique in and of itself. The Aether map also features completely unique ores when compared to the Aether mod. They're somewhat similar in nature to the mod's ores, but that isn't too surprising, given the fact that the Aether mod's ores aren't exactly groundbreaking in terms of the way they were designed. But in terms of what the items do, for the most part, each ore gives a set of tools that are just statistically better than the previous ones. They mine faster, do more damage, and so on. However, a couple of unique items do exist, such as a flaming weapon, a hang glider, and a throwable axe. These don't particularly have any direct counterparts inside the Aether mod. And interestingly, unlike the Aether mod, you can find both custom ores and vanilla ores in the floating islands. But how about bosses? There are 4 bosses included in the Aether map, one more than in the Aether. Each fight is completely unique, with the only similarity being that both of them have a boss called the Slider, but more on that later. The Aether bosses themselves are found inside boss zones located near the edges of the map, which is similar to the mod, but also the same as most any video game ever made. It is worth mentioning that while the map was marketed as adding an Aether dimension, it does in fact not do so, as Minecraft Bedrock doesn't currently allow for custom world generation, let alone custom dimensions. Because of this, what you actually get is a handcrafted world. It's basically one giant build, about 1,000 blocks by 1,000 blocks in size. This, of course, is different than the Aether mod, which actually does infinitely generate at random. So, if you were to explore too far in any direction on the Aether map, you'll eventually reach the end of the floating worlds and be left with nothing but clouds. But hey, why stop there? Keep flying out for a bit and you'll reach the overworld. So essentially, the entire map is contained in a large void area placed in the middle of a normal overworld. So those are pretty unique, but let's dig a little deeper. When it comes to content added that is a nod, or tip of the hat, to features found inside the Aether mod, there are a handful of them to talk about when it comes to the Aether map. Even though the bosses found inside each dungeon of the Aether map are totally unique, 3 of the dungeons themselves seem to be very much so inspired heavily by the Aether mod. Both the color palette and overall look of the builds are remarkably similar to that of the mod. Not the exact same build, but quite clearly inspired by dungeons found in the Aether. Additionally, a couple of the mobs added in the Aether map draw a lot from concepts found within the Aether mod. For example, both of them have flying whales. And while the model is fairly different, functionally and artistically they're fairly similar. Moa aren't directly added either, but they have quite a similar bird mob that takes on a similar role. Twinklers are a butterfly-like creature added in the Aether map as a decorative mob. They kind of just fly around and do nothing, but come in various colors and look cool. Pretty much exactly like the Glitterwing from the Aether mod, which is also a butterfly mob. And finally, in terms of mobs, the other similar one is in the Gold Dungeon. There are these angel-like mobs that look awfully similar to the angels found within the Aether's Silver Dungeon. And then there is the Slider Boss. In the Aether mod, the Slider Boss is a stone cube that slides around the room and damages the player upon collision. Though the Aether map has a boss of the same name, it isn't anything similar to the Slider in the Aether. It's more of a snake-like creature that slides all over the place. Funny enough though, while this isn't similar to any Aether creature, this is incredibly similar to the Naga mob from the Twilight Forest mob. Interestingly enough, people notice that it is not just the boss itself that is similar to the Naga of Twilight Forest fame. The location where you find this creature is also surprisingly similar to the build that the Twilight Forest's Naga resides in, the Courtyard. Both are stone brick walled mazes with an interior of leaf blocks, and the build even features the exact same stone brick floor pattern, which is quite a distinct feature of the original Twilight Forest build. So, while it is quite likely that some of the concepts and ideas from the Aether mod were recreated in the Aether map, what parts of the map really got the community all up in arms over what they viewed as stolen content? Surely just having similar ideas and concepts in the map wouldn't have led to such an uproar, right? Well, the trailer got off to a very rough start by immediately introducing the idea that you get to the Aether dimension using the extremely iconic glowstone portal. This by itself would have likely made people angry, as that was one of the most well-known features of the Aether mod, due to it being a core feature of the content. And in terms of the overall color palette being used for blocks, especially grass, dirt, leaves, and stone, the similarities between the two are impossible to miss. The iconic bluish-green grass can be found throughout a good chunk of the world, but even other biome colors you could normally find in the Aether mod, such as the bright yellows or bluer grasses, are both featured in the Aether map as well. And the biomes shared so many similarities to the original mod that some questioned if they had ported landscapes from the actual mod into the Minecraft Bedrock map. The biomes are set up to nearly exactly resemble how it would generate in the mod, except for the central mountain location that has no equivalent found inside the Aether mod. But this means that at a quick glance, it's quite hard to tell the Aether mod and Aether marketplace map apart from one another. And to people with no intention of buying the map, but who did see the trailer, this level of similarity was not appreciated. There are a few other examples of features that appear to have been directly lifted from the Aether mod into the Aether map, such as Speedy Sand, which does exactly the same thing as in the mod, and the Lightning Sword and Flaming Swords, which are also identical across both mods. But now for the big reveal. By far, the biggest, most impactful similarity between these two projects was far simpler than content featured in the two. It was just that the Marketplace project, with absolutely no affiliation to the extremely popular and historically significant Aether mod, had taken on, at launch, the exact same name, originally calling itself the Aether Dimension. Yes, indeed, the Aether was originally released as the Aether. And so, after having their trailer bombed with dislikes, with loads of outrage and social media on display, and with an overall massive amount of negative attention towards their map, the map makers caved by changing the name of the map to be the Aether. By removing a single letter from the name of the map, it was clearly now a completely different idea and thus not a copy of the Aether. Funny enough, they didn't change the name of their trailer linked on the marketplace, which still has the old name of Aether, and this seems to have quelled the controversy. The project has a high amount of purchases, as indicated by the high number of ratings featured on the map. And it must have done well enough, as recently the team behind the Aether map published the Aether 2 map. That said, checking the like to dislike ratio on the new trailer still shows as rather bad. So clearly changing the name didn't completely fix their public perception. I'll leave it to you to explore more of the drama. For now, we need to get back to what was happening with the original Aether while all of this was unfolding on the public stage. While the Aether mod was seemingly dormant, the team behind it still had plans. A full 8 months before the remastered mod was released, a beta announcement trailer was published on the Aether's YouTube channel, to pretty minimal public reception. They had taken a couple-year break, but were now returning to accomplish a remastering of the mod, which likely meant that this had been in the works as the Aether Marketplace map was being published and the drama was unfolding. But once the team got going, they made what seemed like incredibly quick progress, releasing 1 to 2 beta versions every single month. Slowly but surely, features were added back, until they were finally ready to launch them with a shiny new trailer to boot. The trailer absolutely blew up. quickly gaining hundreds of thousands of views, and as of the time of this writing is currently sitting at 1.5 million hits. The community was ecstatic about one of the most well-known, historically significant mods returning to be playable in the current versions of Minecraft. And due to the age of the mod, there is now a whole new generation of Minecraft players that have never played the mod, let alone maybe even heard of it. So what content has returned in this remastering of the Aether, and what is still to be added? Starting with what's the same, the Aether team managed to add all of the core content of the mod. The world generation, blocks and color palette, biomes, it's all here. All of the dungeons, as well as the 3 bosses inside, have all made a return, including all features related to them, such as the minions, traps, and puzzles. And nearly all the items and ores have also made a return, with only a couple minor ones missing. Plus, a good chunk of the mobs are present, such as the air bunnies and whales, the flying pigs, cows, and sheep, as well as some creatures re-added that hadn't been a part of the mod in more recent releases. In terms of content that was updated from older versions to be a bit more polished or modernized, there are at least a handful. A good chunk of the textures had some changes made to them, notably the buckets, keys, boats, ambrosium, and parachutes. A lot of the other items seem to have had some color changes or small texture adjustments. They also changed the name of the Hammer of Notch weapon to now be the Hammer of King B-Dogs, a tribute to one of their prominent developers who now works at Mojang on the official game as a game designer. But while a good chunk of the core content is present in this 1.0 remastering of the Aether mod, some features are still missing, likely planned for future updates. A good amount of the cloud types are missing, as currently 3 exist out of the 6+ that the previous mod had present. But most notably, a good amount of mobs are also not currently part of the mod, those being the Carrion Sprouts, Curid, Glitterwing, Tempest, and various NPCs. Understandably, the Glitterwings were the decorative butterflies that didn't serve any real purpose, so their lack of inclusion isn't particularly impactful. And the Tempest is basically a stronger version of the Zephyr enemies, so they could be viewed as somewhat redundant. But with this being a 1.0 version, people are rightfully excited to see where they end up with this updated Aether mod. Already having nearly all the previous content in a highly polished state gives everyone so much to look forward to. Where will the Aether mod go from here? Well, you should subscribe to find out.